Manda, so you've done a lot, and it's a little, and when I looked at our age differential and me realizing how much older I was, I thought, how in the world have you done so much cool stuff? So taught at a low income school, you led global media at a multi-billion-dollar company, local church ministry in Chicago, an author. You're now in LA. You do a bunch of speaking, writing, hosting a podcast, coaching, advocating, foster parenting. What did I leave out, by the way? Did I say momming in there, wifing? Like, what did I miss there?
Oh my goodness. I mean, you covered it. And it might sound exhausting, but it's been exhilarating. It's been so fun. And it wasn't like I grew up thinking that's what I want to do. I want to, enlist that whole resume. I really just wanted to be a teacher and maybe write a book. I have gotten to do both of those things, which
Right.
is really cool, but I had no idea what life had in store for me. And it has just been so cool that there have been so many moments I didn't know what was around the corner, and I was either scared because of I hate the unknown, I'm a control freak,
Right.
or things didn't go as planned. I've hit some really low lows that's obviously left out of the resume, but we'll probably touch on it. And honestly, it's all served a purpose. Like nothing has
Oh,
been wasted. And so I'm so grateful. Like I can't tell you, I don't have a 5-year plan. Like I have no idea what I'll be doing 2 years from now, let alone 5.
right.
So it's been really fun.
That's
Yeah.
so awesome. Of all of that, so I'm interested. I want to hear a little bit about where you are right now, and then take us back to kind of how it crescendoed to there. So, what would you say if you were to kind of put in a brief statement, a synopsis? What's the core of your, like, the thrust of your intentionality right now? Like, what's the core of what you're focused on, the thing that gets you up in the mornings, and kind of like your core thesis on life and what you're aiming to do right now?
Yeah. I love this question. If people listening aren't familiar, there's this thing called Life Plan. Have you heard of Life Plan?
I think I have.
It's through the Patterson.
Yes, I have. Yes.
Okay. So, needless to say, when I was working at a church in Chicago, our pastors, who I know you are familiar with, Jarrett and
Yeah.
Jeannie
Oh, the
Stevens, who I
best.
love, they're
The best.
wonderful. Working for them at that church was pivotal, like so great in my vocational but also personal journey, and grew me so much. But anyways, they had mentioned Life Plan and they were familiar with it and had gone through it, and they said, if you ever get the chance, you and Eric, that's my husband, should totally do it. And it's an investment, but if you understand the value of it, like it's worth it. So we saved and planned, and he kind of went first and then I went, and then we got to meet with our facilitator together, which was super fun because normally married couples do it at the same time. But when you're young and don't have a ton of extra cash, you
Right.
take your turns and then you regroup. And I mentioned that to say that what came out of my life plan is sort of this statement that means so much to me. It meant so much to me when I first received it in, gosh, that was 2019, I believe. And here we are today. It's still the kind of thing that I come back to. And that is, I exist to empower the vulnerable and advocate for redemption.
Wow.
In everything that I do, that is why I want to wake up in the morning and be a present mom and be a loving wife and show up for our foster kids or the people in my community, my next door neighbors that we share walls because we're in an apartment building here in LA. Um, what I love about that statement is it so represents who I've always been,
Yeah.
um, ever since I was a child, but also like who I'm becoming. There's still room for growth. And it's wide enough, it's general enough, it's not too specific that like vocationally I can only do one thing for the rest of my life. Um, but it's just this statement of intentionality that keeps me grounded and helps me really filter. I'm like a yes person. I
Yeah.
love saying yes to like anything and everything. And what's the problem with that is you get burnout really quickly, and then
Sure.
you have all these like good distractions. You could say yes to any and everything, but they're not always your best yes.
Yeah.
And so a statement like that, I exist to empower the vulnerable and advocate for redemption, it means so much to me, and it really serves as a filter for what I show up and how I show up in the
Wow.
world.
It allows you to say no to things, but then also puts you within a right framework, right? Where you have different vehicles for doing that. That's who you are. That's who you've always been. So it gives you a vehicle. So whether it's teaching or speaking or coaching or whatever it is, podcast, I'm sure that makes it that that allows you, I would assume, to then just walk in that with full confidence. Like, oh, this is what I was made to do, which is not, which I've had a problem. I'm curious if you've had a problem with this in your life of kind of owning that, because it feels like arrogance. You know, you in a way you want to go away from arrogance, but then if you realize, no, I got a bunch of crappy stuff too, but but this is who I am. Has it helped you walk in that more confidently with a little bit more bravado or something like that?
Yeah, yeah, I totally relate to what you're saying. I think it's really helped me because it serves as this compass of the direction I want to move in.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes hard to explain, but like I once heard someone say, like, you can't get where you want to go until you know where you are.
Yeah.
And so similar when you walk into a mall, I don't know how much the last time I've been like a mall, but there's like a map and the star says you are here, and then Annie Ann's Pretzels is up here, and I
That's
really
where
want to
you
get
go
there.
immediately. Right.
Yeah, yeah. And so for me, that statement, it really just serves as where I want to go. But then there's so many other tools in my life that help me to see where I am. Like you are right here. And it's just this guide that kind of keeps me on track. I get off track all the time, let's be
Yeah.
honest. Like, so yeah. But it feels good to not be waking up and feeling like every day's the same and I'm not evolving. I want my life to be moving in a direction that has meaning. Like I have to know that there's a greater purpose to this because to be honest, life has not always been kind.
Yeah.
Mental health has been a huge struggle of mine. I talk about that in my latest book. There have been moments, more than one, where I haven't wanted to be here anymore, to be totally frank.
Sure.
And I don't know how else to explain it other than if I don't stay grounded in a purpose of like, I exist, I am here to do this thing every single day. I'm going to get up and I'm going to like try to add value to the world in this particular way, then I'm not sure I could handle like
Yeah.
year after year with all the things that happen in the world, another mass shooting,
Yeah.
another another diagnosis in the family, another, you know, failure or thing that goes wrong. And we're all dealing with that on
Yeah.
some level, like personally and systematically. There's just heartache all around. And this might sound morbid, but like I've kind of found that that's the only way for me to stay and contribute and be a part of this world and enjoy it, honestly,
Yeah.
is to say, why am I here? What is the meaning? And so, yeah, I think if I were waking up day after day and that wasn't clear, or there wasn't any vision for it, and I had no idea where I was or where I wanted to go, that is a scary, dark thought for
Yeah.
me.
How did, in the times before you had these tools, before you had this clarity on who you were and what you were meant to be, how did you get through those? I mean, for people maybe listening right now who maybe don't have that same level of clarity, what is that encouragement? How did you get through those times? And then, maybe that advice for somebody who is going through that without the specific clarity on who they are and where they're going.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say there are so many tools out there for self-awareness and mirrors, essentially, mirror holders, whether it's another person like a mentor that you just talk to or a counselor that you can start to see a clearer picture of who you are and where you're at and how you're feeling. I think so many of us too, we're just out of tune with what's going on inside.
Yeah.
And we have to be willing to face reality. So that's kind of step one is like really assess your life and assess how you're feeling and where you're at. And if you're able to then get really honest, well, it might feel defeating or a little bit like, oh no, things are worse than I thought, or I'm further from where I want to be than I thought, or whatever the case is. But it's actually hopeful
Yeah.
because it is the only way forward. And so once you kind of have that self-awareness and you can take ownership, you can start to utilize people, books, podcasts, resources. So many tools exist to help you sort of move forward. And there's a lot that you can do for yourself, but I just want to say like I am not like a hustle motivator type coach. Like I don't believe we can save ourselves. I don't believe we can do it all on our own. I think so much of this requires vulnerability and to be in community, and that is super vulnerable. But if you're willing to go there, if you're willing to say, I am waking up and admitting I hate my life.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm grouchy towards my kids. I don't like my spouse. There's no love between us. My job is just a job that I make money at, and I need a total kind of life overhaul. Well, I am so proud of you for admitting that.
Right.
And now you can move forward. And there are ways to do that. So, yeah, I mean, one of those tools, shameless plug, my book, Soul Care to Save Your Life.
Yeah.
It's 15 practices that help you work through all that inner stuff that it matters, I think, more than anything else in the world, but nobody else can see it. It's intangible. So it's really difficult. It's like, where do you start? How do I do this work? So it's a process, it's a journey,
Yeah.
and it really has no ending point. It's sort of ongoing. But there's hope. There is hope.
Yeah. And in some ways, it's almost like when you acknowledge those things that you're feeling, or you say, I do hate my job, in some ways it removes that level of expectation you have for it to be the thing that fulfills you. And so in that way, just that acknowledgement in and of itself is such a powerful thing, because it removes that expectation. Like, this is not my source. I had a
Yes.
crappy day last week, and I picked up my daughter from her volleyball practice, and as on the drive home, I was just, and she's built emotionally like me, so she feels the same way I do. I'm kind of built, not to be too gender specific, but I'm built like a woman emotionally. So I was just talking with her and about my day, and I thought about this when you were talking about awareness and how I'm feeling, and what I came down to on the things throughout that day that just kind of sucked. I just got to the point where I thought, I'm just mad because things didn't go my way today. Like, I wanted things to go a certain way and they didn't go. And in a way, that was just an acknowledgement. It was good. Like, it's not something catastrophic. It's just like I wanted 4 or 5 things that I didn't get.
Mm.
And it is that very first step of just that self-awareness, and it requires stillness. It requires, quiet to get to that place. So I'd love that as a very first start. And then from there, you can say, okay, I need to talk to somebody, or I need to whatever fill in the blank. But
Yeah.
I love that beginning step of the self-awareness.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the requirement before all else, because if you're not self-aware, like I said, it's like that map. If you don't know where you are and who you
Yeah.
are, then you have no idea where you're going and who you're going to be or how to get there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, super important stuff.
Can we break down your life plan statement? The 2 parts to that: empower the vulnerable, advocate for redemption. Will you start with the first piece of that, empower the vulnerable? So who are the vulnerable? Who are the ones that you're seeking out? And then what are you doing to empower them, just for Manda Carpenter personally?
Yeah, yeah. Love this question, because this is kind of what we did through my life plan when we were solidifying that this was the statement to kind of check it. It was like, okay, well, let's answer those questions. So, who are the vulnerable? Um, I I won't use like a Google textbook definition. I'll use my definition, which
Yeah.
is the vulnerable is anyone who I see as an underdog, anyone who may not have the same privileges that I have, anyone who is currently in a place where they could use a helping hand. They're vulnerable. So that doesn't mean that someone who's wealthy couldn't be in a vulnerable position. They
Sure.
could. They could be emotionally super vulnerable. They could be in a place where they're vulnerable for other reasons. So it's not necessarily a financial stipulation or an oppression stipulation. Although I will say the majority of people who I would consider to be in a vulnerable place are typically being oppressed and are facing a lot of injustices systematically. So again, there's room for lots of people in there. It means I don't say no to working with someone just because they're
Yeah.
not living on the streets. I try to see my work as both and. Um, for me, that does include fostering. My husband and I are foster parents, so both from a lifestyle standpoint of being foster parents, but also it's that extends far beyond just caring for the kids in our care. It's really, how can we wrap our arms around and partner with their parents, their
Yeah.
whole family, um, because that is what it means for us to empower the vulnerable. It's not just love the cute kid in your care, it's love their whole family, which is sometimes not as fun or natural, if I'm really honest, but
Sure.
it's necessary, and I've seen the beauty from it. And that kind of leads to part two, which is advocating for redemption. And not that this whole thing has to do with foster care, but just to extend that example
Right.
over, when we empower the vulnerable, that is how that is largely how I see redemption happen. So that is one way that I get to advocate for redemption. But I get to advocate for redemption when I speak into someone's marriage that is seemingly hopeless and in shambles. And I get to share my story of how my husband and I went through a really hard thing. I was unfaithful the very first year that we were married, and kept that a secret for too long. Ended up the guilt and the shame took a toll on my mental health, and I that was when I was at my lowest. I had a lot of suicidal ideations and thought there was no reason for me to be here anymore. Finally confessed that to him, and we, over time, because I don't want to make it seem like it was all sunshine and rainbows, but over time repaired and restored our marriage. And here we are many years later, thriving and now getting to share that experience and help advocate for redemption in other people's marriages.
Yeah.
That's just one example, but advocating for redemption looks like, how can I show up in the world and help bring people together, help bring a person back together? How can I help bring restoration and healing to the world in any way? Um, to a family, to a person, to a system, to an organization. It takes a lot of different forms, but
Yeah.
hopefully that breakdown kind of helps
I
explain
love
those
that.
two parts.
Well, this is as basic a question as I get, and I know the textbook definition, but that I feel like the concept of redemption, I've heard for whatever reason, maybe I've just heard it more and more over the last few weeks specifically. We talk about just that term redemption, I mean, even the concept, and go deep on it, because I think it's a
Yeah.
really amazing one. I think we're all seeking some level of redemption,
Hmm.
and like you said, it comes in a lot of different forms. I'd be curious to hear, since you're so focused on it, what that means to you.
Yeah. Redemption to me means, I mean, I would say it's synonymous with healing. Um, but I would also say that redemption, like, we often want the redemption story that is like a happy ending. But healing doesn't always mean you get a happy ending. You can experience healing, but the marriage still ends. You can experience healing, but the person still dies. You can experience healing, but you don't get the outcome you want. And yet, there's still redemption. Redemption, just like adoption, we'll take that for example. A lot of things come back to me for
Sure.
within the child welfare system. So, adoption. To me, adoption is a redemption story. This child gains permanency and forever with a family who has chosen them and loves them. And that's beautiful. That's amazing. There is healing in that. And there is still a brokenness and a grieving. And it's this both and. It's not perfect. To me, in a perfect world, like in a heaven type of world, quote
Yeah.
unquote, um, we wouldn't need adoption. Everyone would get to stay with their own mom and dad, and everyone would be wanted and treated well, and that everyone would be capable and financially capable of caring for their own, right? So, but to me, redemption is still possible. It's sometimes so hard to explain, but
Yeah.
redemption is simply to me that the end of the story was not all broken, all bad, no healing, no closure. That there was healing, there was closure, there was beauty on the other side of this. Any redemption story that I can tell is beautiful,
Yeah.
and there was pain and hardship, and things still didn't go necessarily the way I wanted it to go.
It's almost like in order for a redemption story, there has to be some ugly that preceded it. There has to be something that there's no need for redemption otherwise. So you're right. I
Totally.
love your idea, the thought of it's both and. Yeah, that is beautiful, and it really was terrible.
Yeah.
It doesn't erase that first part of it.
Yeah, I think it's almost why we, or at least I, really prefer redemption stories to just like, I mean, I think all of us do. Like, we love the underdog winning. We
Yeah.
love to see the person come back from a struggle, or the person who's released from being incarcerated go on to do something really big and cool with their lives. We love these redemption stories. But like you said, the ugliness comes first. There has to be brokenness first. It's why I think we're attracted to people who've gone through really hard things, hard trauma, and yet survived and lived to tell it and have gone on with their lives. Um, Versus just a story where someone was like born into greatness and continue to
Yeah.
be great. It's like, that's cool, but like, show me someone who
Yeah.
has been in the thick of it and yet it didn't destroy them. And that's redemption.
I love that. I want to hear you. So your podcast, the Longer Table Podcast, which is fantastic, by the way, so much so that
Thanks.
we sponsor it. We love it so much. But we love what you're doing. But it's you don't shy away there in your conversations. No topic is off limits. Will you tell me first about the term a longer table, and then maybe the origin story of how that came to be, and your lack of fear of controversial topics?
Sure. So first and foremost, a longer table. That phrase has meant so much to me since my husband and I first got married. We were trying to find kind of like a scripture or a verse to build our life around. And at the time, I would say there was some deconstructing of faith going on his end. He's been very open about his faith journey, so he wouldn't mind if I share that. And so a scripture just wasn't resonating for us as a couple. And instead, we said, we had both one of us had stumbled upon the phrase, when you have more than you need, build a longer table rather than a higher fence, which has been attributed to different people. So I don't know the exact original source, but that quote is something we clung to and is something we said in terms of intentional living. That's how we want to live our life. That's the thing we want to come back to. Obviously, later on came the life plan, which sort of clarifies that even more and gets even more like granular.
Yeah.
But from a general perspective, I was 23. We had just gotten married, and it was like, when we have more than we need, let's build a longer table rather than a higher fence. So, fast forward years later, 2020, I believe I launched a longer table podcast. Maybe it was 2019. The years are
I get it.
everything's a blur because of COVID.
Of course.
Um, but I said, you know what? I think that that's what I want to name the podcast is a longer table podcast. I was like, I am craving a space where people can talk about things that matter, sometimes things that are hard or controversial, without necessarily agreeing, but we can sit at the same table and have that conversation. And and I think I was personally on my own journey of I had always kind of seen the world as like black and white.
Yeah.
And as an Enneagram 8, a type 8, if anyone identifies and can relate, that's super common for an 8. Um, but as we move towards health, I think for me at least, what's been true is I've realized the world is not black and white, that
Yeah.
actually things are a lot more gray than I thought they were. And that when I lean into the gray and I maybe embrace the gray a little bit, I end up loving people better. I end up less in this self righteous state and much more in this ability to be curious and empathetic and learn and hear people out. And so I would say it was in our time of living in Chicago, still somewhat newly married and fostering, that I began to realize, oh, the parents of these kids in my care, they're not monsters. This is not black and white. It's not they're bad people and I'm a good person. Oh man, they've got a lot that's kind of been against them or not on their side, a lot that's led them to where they're at today. Maybe this is a little more gray. Maybe not every kid should be in foster care who's in foster care. And it was like my wheels, the wheels were turning. And as I was having these realizations, it extended far beyond foster care. It was like the way I voted and the way I saw politics. And it's just like, I don't have all the answers. I still
Yeah.
don't, clearly. I have a lot more questions than answers nowadays. And a lot more that I say, I don't have a clue. I used to be so sure about it. And now I don't know. I don't have a stance because I'm a little confused and I think it's a really gray area. So to make a long story short, that is why I decided to launch a longer table podcast was I wanted to have spaces where we could talk about things and no matter where you lived, what type of community you lived in, you could kind of get out of your echo chamber and try to hear other
Yeah.
perspectives on a variety of conversations.
I think I think stances are generally overrated. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
why is my opinion on name the topic? Why is that important? You know what I mean? Because then it literally, why is it important? There's no real reason for me to take stances on a bunch of things that we all do. Social media, and this is not a slam on social media. It just makes it very easy to believe that your stance is that important on a
Mhm.
macro issue. Um, you have a line that I love, and actually a quick story before. So in the I guess it was early 2000s, we were in a small group, and it was right around when the Iraq War was happening. So this is after 9/11. Iraq War was happening. I was, gung ho, heck yeah, we got to go in there, WMDs and all that kind of stuff. And then one of my good friends, Matt, who was in our small group, who had 3 young kids, was sent there. He was sent in the belly of the beast. He was right in the fighting zone. And I thought, am I really as much for this war as I thought I was? This is no statement on the war, but it was just when something like that really personalized, when it personalized to me, it changed the entire way I viewed all of that, because I wasn't viewing this war as a bunch of my friends going off into Fallujah. It was me more viewing it as, okay, this is just a big macro thing. So I think that in the line you say, and by the way, for anybody listening, that's not a statement on what I thought about the war or anything on politics. It was just the fact that it became a personal issue to me, and it made me rethink what my actual belief was on it. But when
Yes.
you say something that I love, and it made me think about it, is you say curiosity and proximity will change everything you thought you knew.
Yep.
Will you expand on that statement, because it's profound?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the next books I'm working on. And that's the subtitle is Curiosity and Proximity Will Challenge Everything You Thought You Knew. It's the story of my life. It is everything that I thought I knew. I was so sure, which is every 20 something, I think.
Sure.
Maybe it was just me, but I mean, take an Enneagram 8 who's not healthy in her 20s, who thinks she knows it all. That was me. I'm gonna humble myself and just admit it. And I was just wrong about so many things. And it wasn't until I got curious and I was in proximity to people, not just the topic on these issues, but actual people living day to day lives who have stories, that I started to kind of come against some tension for the first time.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, maybe the way that I was told that this happens, maybe that's not the way that people end up living on the streets. Like maybe my unhoused neighbors are just that, my unhoused neighbors, not necessarily a drug addict who made bad choices and ended up on the streets. And even if that is their story, well, there's probably more to it, and they are worthy of being loved and
Yeah.
heard. And so, I mean, I could talk about this for days, but I always say there isn't a single person we wouldn't love if we knew their story. I truly believe that. I think take your nemesis, take the person you can't stand. Okay. I won't say the name of the person that comes to mind for me, but there is one. Okay.
It's
So
not
I'm
me.
not
It's not me,
holier.
is it? It's not me, right?
Joey, it is not
Okay,
you.
good.
It
Good,
is
good.
not you.
Carry
It
on.
is
Got it.
someone, it is someone, I'll just describe this. It is someone who I see politically everything opposite on. I think their approach to things is wrong. I can get in that headspace. What helps me come back to a place of genuine love and curiosity towards her is when I say, Amanda, first of all, it wasn't that long ago that you were just like her.
Yeah.
And in many ways, you still are just like her. And if you got to know her story, I bet you'd find out a lot of things that have led her to really double down on who she is today. And suddenly, empathy is replacing judgment, and compassion is replacing comparison.
Yeah.
And that's huge. And so I believe if we're willing to get curious and we're willing to get in proximity, and proximity doesn't mean you have to uproot your life and move to a city or move across the world. Proximity can be through podcasts, through books. Like, thankfully, because of technology today, proximity is accessible no matter where you are, for the most part, and without you having to completely overhaul your life and uproot. Um, and I just want to say that if you go down that journey, it's going to be incredible, and I like want you to do it so much, but also you might lose a few friends.
Right.
You might um go through some hardships along the way, because if you're like me, especially, you won't be able to sit quietly and just accept conversation that doesn't allow for nuance. For example, if I'm sitting in a room, even at a family gathering, and everyone's talking about a thing that they like, oh, can you believe this, or can you believe whatever, I am one of the first people to say, well, but what
Yeah.
about, let me play devil's advocate. Like, I'm that annoying person now, but it's because I'm always like, there's nuance here, and it's
Yeah.
more gray than you think, and you're only looking at it. If you can't see past your nose, well, then of course you're going to see that way.
Yeah.
But if we can look past our nose, if we can consider the bigger picture, if we can listen and get to know other people's stories, it might shake things up. It might change the way we see the world and the way we believe.
Which is also hard, because in some ways it's like you're becoming more tolerant and understanding, but then is it hard once you've had that kind of revelation for yourself that I need to be more tolerant and understanding? It almost can turn into judgment over those who are not tolerant and understanding. That seems like there's a little bit of a catch
Totally.
22 there.
Yes, I love that you're bringing that up. That is something that's so important to talk about. My husband and I were just talking about it recently. We said we're too liberal for our conservative friends. We're too conservative for our liberal
Right.
friends. Like we kind of find ourselves never fitting in. And something that we have seen particularly in spaces where people, let's use the woke language. Like
Sure.
they're more woke, right? What I see that side, which most people would put me on that side, they would say, "Oh, you're liberal or you're this or that." Even though I wouldn't say I am at all actually, but I don't fit anywhere. Um what I would say is I do see this, yeah, it's like we want you to include everyone and love everyone. Okay, but now we're going to judge you if you don't do those
Right.
things.
Yes.
I totally see what you're saying, and that's something where we've even had a hard time, like my husband and I haven't been going to a church recently because we just haven't found a space where we're really looking for a place that when they say everyone is welcome,
Yeah.
they truly mean everyone. Most people hear that and they think, oh, you mean like include the LGBTQ plus community. Yes, sure. But beyond that, I still want my Republican family members to feel
Yeah.
comfortable attending your church. I still want people who don't see it all the same way as me, politically, spiritually, or in other ways, to be welcome at that table too. So that's the thing that I've tried to do with my life and on my podcast in one format is I want to build a longer table. And I have had to, I'm constantly trying to invite more voices to the table that I don't see eye to eye with because I genuinely value their perspective and I
Yeah.
want to have those conversations. You know, Joey, the hard part though is most people who it's very obvious we don't see things eye to eye, they don't want to come on the podcast. Like, darn it.
Come on.
I want to have a pleasant conversation with you. So finding those people to have those conversations isn't always easy, but I've been grateful for the ones that we have had.
Have you found, I mean, truly, whenever whether it's on the podcast or even just in everyday life, when you have conversations with people who differ with you, when you do have that one-on-one, do you find things, I mean, has it played out like that? Things really do, you find more commonality than you thought you had? Is that pretty consistent?
Compl- yes. Yes. For sure. Obviously, the healthier myself and that other person
Yeah.
is, the easier and smoother that conversation goes. And I think the more we're able to see, wait a second, a line that I've been using recently in hard conversations is, I think we want the same thing. We just see two very different paths
Yeah.
to getting there. Or, yeah, like we both want there to be no one living on the streets. I think we just see two different paths to how we can make that a reality.
Yeah.
Or, same thing goes for, I don't, neither of us want mass shootings to happen. You
Yeah.
think this will solve it. I think this might solve it. But at the end of the day, let's come back to where is the common ground. We both want almost always the same thing. We just see different paths to getting there. And if we can make room for that, if we can make space for that, if we can welcome that it's a both and situation and don't always have to be quote unquote right or changing people's minds, people are a lot more willing to stick around and hang out and have a conversation, even if it's a little bit wonky at times.
It's so true. Just by acknowledging that, I've often wondered what would happen if in a presidential debate, if one of the candidates said that, like, "Hey, I think you love America, I really do," but I think you know what I mean. It seems like that would be. I think it seems like there would be that middle of America would really there would be some on the fringes who would actually probably hate that, but right in the middle, I
Yeah,
think the majority of Americans would be like, "Yeah, I like that. I think that's true."
totally. I
Uh,
know.
I do. You referenced it earlier. I do. I have a bunch of questions, but I want to hear about Soul Care to Save Your Life. That was your book. You wrote a women's devotional in 2008, which is called Space. And then Soul Care to Save Your Life was a book that came out last year, 2021,
Yeah,
2022. Okay. So
yeah,
very new. And you go through those soul care practices, break it into three parts. Will you talk about a couple of those things, maybe a little bit of an overview of the book, and then maybe a couple of those practices even for someone listening today that they can latch on to, the first practice
sure.
of which certainly being going and buying the book today, which everybody needs to do. But will you walk us through some
Yeah.
of that?
Yeah, this book was like the book I couldn't not write. Like I didn't want to tell these stories because one way to summarize Soul Care to Save Your Life is just to say it is every lesson I learned the hard way in my 20s. Um And let me just say, I learned it the hard way.
If you,
Like I didn't choose the easy route. Like I had to learn it through really, some of it's funny, but also some of it's devastating,
yeah,
like infidelity in your marriage. Who wants to go through that? Like, could I have learned about integrity a different way, or learned that I had an addiction that needed to be healed outside of committing that sin and going through that really terrible thing and putting my husband through that? I wish,
yeah,
but that's not the way my story goes. So it's a book where I'm really honest. So it feels, I would say, it reads like a memoir. You get to know me and my story, but it's not all about me. I'm telling my story as a way of really inviting you to consider your own. And so each of the 15 chapters has a soul care practice that I allude to, that I invite you to try. And then at the end of each chapter, there are 5 reflection questions. You can use those by yourself, which I really encourage. But then I would also say, take it forward. I said this earlier, you can only go so far on your own. So invite someone into that space with you, maybe through a small group or a mentor or just a bestie, and tackle those questions then with somebody else who can serve as your mirror holder. But it's 3 parts. It's awareness, ownership, transformation. And we've already talked about awareness a little bit. I think that's step 1, is you got to know who you are and where you are and really get deep there. Ownership is then taking it to a place where you don't just say, well, this is who I am. I'm an addict. I
yeah,
struggle with this thing. Like, sucks to suck. That's just who I am. I lived in that space for a little while because I truly thought that that was it, and I realized that's such a victim mindset, and
yeah,
and it doesn't have to be that way. And so I walk you through some exercises around ownership, and kind of getting off of autopilot, as I call it. I think so many of us are living on autopilot. We just wake up, we do the same things every day. There's things we don't like about our life. We don't do anything to change it. We just kind of accept it as this is the best I got. I don't know. And we just do that day after day after day. And oh, it's so sad. Like there is that is dying. Like that
yeah,
is death. Like you are just inching towards death. And we all are, I guess, in a morbid sense. But it's so much, life is just so much richer and more meaningful and beautiful if we don't live on autopilot. And so I really walk through that. And then that last section on transformation is I believe wholeheartedly that people can change. I believe that because I myself have and continue to, and I see it all around me. I know there are people who are cynical, skeptic, have walked through a lot of painful things, and they view someone, at least in their life, as like, oh, well, there's no way they could change. There's no way they could ever actually be healed or different. And I would just challenge that and say, um, you may not see it in your lifetime, uh, but people can change. And I think there's a huge difference between change and transformation. And so the focus is on transformation. I really kind of define the two and the difference, and then, walk through. Because I think so many self-help books, for example, they teach you how to change. And that's great. That might be helpful for a week or a month
right,
or 5 years. And even 5 years, great. I'm glad you changed for those 5 years. But in order to truly transform, and for it to not be you're just managing behaviors, you're just modifying your behavior, like that is the opposite of what I want to see happen for people. And it wasn't until I got out of trying and striving to change and modify my behavior that I was actually able to kind of accept and surrender and lean into this much more organic journey of transformation. So that's sort of an overview. The
yeah,
practices, though, I mean, some of them are super simple. It's embrace embarrassment for the sake of freedom. That is a practice. And I tell you how I've experienced that and how you can do that too. Um, Another one is, oh goodness, I'm totally blanking on my
so
own practices.
now I have them here. Live in a rhythm of real, ground yourself in the
Yes,
good, identify your hidden secrets, develop a habit of confession,
yeah,
dig your layer
yeah,
deeper. Yeah, what's one or two of those that are for the, actually, I actually want to hear the embrace embarrassment, because that's really
yeah.
good. I actually like that. In fact, I believe that in order to really be great, you have to have a group of friends around you who will embarrass you and make fun of you a bunch. So I think that's good. But what does that mean to embrace embarrassment for the sake of freedom?
Yeah, I don't think we can be free if we're faking it. And I think that when we stop faking it, we are bound to embarrass ourselves a time or two. So embracing embarrassment for the sake of freedom can look like a lot of different things. For me, it has looked like I have felt very embarrassed speaking up in a group about something. But man, if I hadn't spoken up, I would have
Yeah.
not been authentic and true to myself. So I had to embrace embarrassment in order to feel free and to be free. I've had to embrace embarrassment of trying new things. Starting my podcast, for example.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I, I am actually someone who struggles a lot with social anxiety. And so I don't think people have a clue how hard it is for me to get behind a mic, show up weekly on a podcast, or even more so is for me going on a stage. I spoke in front of like 500 a couple years ago. And I mean, I was like throwing up behind stage beforehand. Like, I'm not your natural, like, get up there and talk to everyone. That is my husband. And so, but I push myself to do it sometimes because embracing embarrassment, even though, and I have had talks go so badly. I have had podcasts that go so poorly. Hopefully not this one, Joey.
Not this one. That's
But
great.
but I have had to learn that embracing embarrassment is one of the only ways that we can live free. If we spend our whole life trying to avoid being embarrassed,
Yeah.
we are going to live as like a shell of ourselves, and our life will reflect that. And so that's just one of the 15 practices that have really taught me how I can care for myself on a deeper level and live my best life and show up in
Yeah.
this world whole and healed. Yeah.
You talk about something that I can relate to in the book. You talk about a need for affirmation, which I can relate to, and it seems to me as you're leaning into embarrassment, it also releases your need for affirmation. It's two different things. Where if you're not, and you're right, being on a podcast, it is very vulnerable for me, and not only would someone say, "Hey, your podcast is crappy," like that would crush me, right? But I'm also in the same way, like really like cling to those, like the compliments also. And I don't like either of those. I don't want either of
Hmm.
those. And so if you're willing to be embarrassed, then you kind of relinquish the need for as much affirmation. And then then the negativity doesn't hurt as much either. Can you relate to that?
Yeah. Oh, totally. I forget who said that famous phrase or quote that's basically like if you live for the praise, you'll die from the rejection. And
Yeah.
in other
There you
words,
go.
they say it differently, but I so relate. Honestly, I would have quit the internet and what I do day to day a long time ago if that were, you can't let the praise or the affirmation kind of build you up or get to your head. You cannot let that be the thing that drives you and motivates you, because it is true. Then when you get the rejection and the hate and the hard stuff, or you fail, and trust me, you will fail if you're living
Right.
publicly at times. It'll crush you, and then you'll just be done, and like that's not sustainable. So
Yeah.
I think a more sustainable way of living is to really get clear and to find what is motivating me and make sure check it often.
Yeah.
That is something I bring up, I say in the book a lot, is I am constantly assessing my motives, my motives, probably the best way to put it. Like,
Right.
why am I wanting to do this thing? Why do I want to have this conversation with this person? Like, why did I say the thing that, like, motives I think matter so, so much.
Yeah.
And I also think it's reflected. I tell a really short story in the book about going to a John Mayer concert and feeling just so in awe watching him do his thing. I mean, obviously he's incredible. We all know this,
Right.
or if you don't know, he's incredible. Um, of a guitar player. And so watching him do his thing, but like you could just tell like he wasn't motivated or there to like put on a show or because everyone, like thousands had gathered to see him. Like he was almost like in his own world, like not paying attention to the crowd or really
Yeah.
anyone. I mean, his eyes were closed half the time and he was just like in it, loving his thing. And we can never tell anyone else's motives. So I'm not trying to say that we could tell his motives, but it is very evident. I think it almost always comes through. People can sniff that out.
Yeah.
And it's so much more attractive when your motives are pure. And so it's just a practice. It's part of the work of soul care
Yeah.
is constantly assessing and checking yourself.
Yeah, that's so true. And it is, you're right. It's the practice. The practice becomes the being and the being becomes practice, and it's all kind of all intertwined. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah,
I want to be
yeah.
respect. So I'm curious, and you are so intentional. You are so lasered in. How do you and Eric, especially you're with Shia? How old is Shia?
He's two.
Shia's 2. So you get the little one at home. You've had a bunch of foster kids. 16, is that right? 16 foster kids come through your home.
We just had our 17th. So
17.
yeah, yeah.
Unbelievable. So you
Just had
clearly
our,
have to be locked in on the technology side. We talked a little bit about it before the show, and this is not me asking you for for a commercial for us. I'm curious your
yeah.
relationship, your and Eric's relationship with technology, your intentionality around it, and how you manage that in your home.
Yeah. Yeah. This is super important to us because I'm going to admit that, like, without really hard boundaries around it, I would be on my phone way too much.
Yeah, ditto. Ditto.
And I don't know if that's solely because of the work that we do, right? Like, a lot of my work, I have to show up on social media. And for a long time, I kind of used that as a way of justifying my excessive phone use. And then I think I got sick of myself and those excuses, and kind of saw other people living a more free life where they weren't so attached to this device. And I was like, wait, there's got to be a better way. And so, yeah, you can learn how to, like, plan social media more in batches and only show up a couple of times a day for short times and not be scrolling. And I did begin to implement all of that, and that's been really helpful. But what I've been loving about us getting the Aro device, honestly, is I was telling you before we started recording, like yesterday, my son, our 2-year old, gets home from daycare, and we only have like 2.5 hours
Yeah.
between him coming home from daycare and, like, he's got to go to sleep, because an overly tired toddler is not a fun toddler to be around.
Right.
And we want our mom and dad, alone time. So those 2.5 hours, I think what I find is that it's really easy for me to, like, try to multitask. One, because I'm a high capacity person. Two, because it's kind of the world we live in, and it's so, like, culturally and societally, like, normal. Um, but it's so harmful. I'll never forget, like, there was a day where I was, like, cooking, like, mac and cheese or something on the stove while trying to, like, answer an email and, like, also put a story up in my stories. And then Shia was, like, tugging on my leg because he needed something. And then I ended up spilling the spatula thing out of the pot and, like, got mad at him, like, got
Yeah.
frustrated at my 2-year-old.
Mm.
And it was like, whoa. I mean, in that moment, I think I felt so guilty, honestly, within like 10 seconds, because I had just snapped at my 2-year-old and he hadn't done anything wrong.
Yeah.
I was overly stimulated. I was trying to do too many things at once. I wasn't being present to the child that needed me. And that was a big wake up call. And that's one example of a million times that I have failed as a parent. But what has been a practice for Eric and I, and he's much better at this than me. So I'm thankful that I have a spouse who kind of does, I would say, lead in this way. We kind of have our strengths, and this one is his, is unplugging, being fully present, both in conversation with other people. Like, when he's playing with our son, that's all he's doing. He's not also trying to work, also trying to cook, also trying to clean. And I know that, especially single parent households, you're going to multitask sometimes. It's inevitable.
Right.
But I do think that if we're willing to put some boundaries in place and get intentional and creative, we can all uh, detach a little bit more. And so what I've been loving about the RO devices, we came home from daycare pickup yesterday, and we have these 2.5 hours, and we knew we wanted to spend time with Shia. We knew we had to go to Target to get more milk because we were out. And again, we do not run out of milk with a toddler. And we had to cook dinner. He needed a bath. So it was like, how are we fitting all this in? And we decided, it was kind of on a whim, but my husband's like, okay, I'm gonna plug in to the RO. I was like, me too, because we're like, we don't need our phones for anything. We have our cards and our keys. Like, our phone, while it has the capability to, like, pay at the store and unlock things and do all these cool things, you don't have to rely on it for that. Like, it doesn't have to be an extension of your hand. And so we put it away. We went to Target, walked there first, got the milk, put it in the thing. We're like, okay, we'll go do 30 minutes at the park. Go, did 30 minutes at the park. We were just fully on with Shia, having fun with him. We get home, we start cooking dinner. We were home, and neither of us went to the device to unplug our phone from the RO, because we were just continuing in that rhythm of being fully present. And it wasn't until he went to bed that we both got our phones out and we were like, okay, let's take like 15, 20 minutes, check in. What do we miss? What do we need to do? And yeah, I mean, not to go on and on and on, but I can truly say that it is more than just a box where you put your phone. What I am loving about it and what motivates me so much is when I, like, unplug it and it tells me, like, how much time it was in there, and then I get to log what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so I put outdoor time with Shia and Eric, like, that is so motivating for me, because it's not just about not being on my phone. It's what I am doing and what I am
Yeah.
saying yes to when it's gone. And honestly, I'm so excited for, like, when I hit the year mark, because I can't wait to see how many hours I've gotten back in
Right.
my year. Um, And I use an old fashioned alarm clock next to my bed, and we keep our
Nice.
phones in the Aro at night. And like, that's a game changer because I'm reading before bed, which is something that I used to do that I had gotten out of the habit of since becoming a mom to Shia. Just because I think the newborn phase happened and then it was the infant little phase. It's just like, it can kind
Sure.
of never end. And you can sort of keep justifying never getting back to a healthy place with rhythms in general or phone usage. But eventually, like, you just have to wake up one day and say, I'm sick of this and I want it to change. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to
Right.
change.
Yeah.
And Aro has just been something where
Wow.
genuinely it's helping us so much. And we're so grateful for it. We love it. Our friends love it. They come over, they're like, oh, I can charge my phone. They plug it in. They, are with us and wanting to be present. So it's been awesome. Yeah, I can't say enough great things about it. I am just organically telling everyone I know about it.
Wow, that's very nice of you. I love hearing that the future that you're setting up for Shia is so great. Just him recognizing, having that intrinsic sense of value that he's more valuable than our devices. So that's awesome that Eric
Yeah.
are doing that.
Yeah, more, what do they say? More is caught than taught, right?
That's
So
right.
like, I'm not going to teach him how to not be on his phone when he has one someday. Oh my gosh, that's a scary thought. But hopefully he'll very easily know how to put it down because we have family dinners and we don't have our phones out at family
Right.
dinners because he just sees that's just going to become the norm in our family, I hope. So, yeah,
That's
I
so
think it's
awesome.
huge.
I love that. Or what's your one thing, if someone could leave with just a single thing, a message for someone listening today, what would you want people to hear today? Just the one thing we could leave people with.
Yeah. I would just say you're not stuck.
Gosh,
You're
that's
not stuck, whatever that means for you. You're not stuck in an unhappy marriage. You're not stuck at a job you hate. You're not stuck in whatever way that you're unfulfilled. That there is hope, there is possibility to change and to transform and to, you can have a brighter future than your past. So don't settle. You're not stuck. There is a way forward.
that's not a small message, and I want the listener to do something that's maybe a little bit unconventional, but just hit after I say this, hit pause, and I just want you to say, "I'm not stuck." Just
Mm.
just let your ears hear your mouth say that. Just say, "I'm not stuck," and you'll believe it. Your ears believe with your mouth what you hear, and so I think that's an important thing for us to hear. So just hit pause real quick. We'll be waiting for you, and just say, "I'm not stuck." Man, that's really really good. Thank you for your generosity of time. This has been amazing. Mandacarpenter.com is where people can go. They
Yeah.
need to listen to a Longer Table podcast. You need to go buy Soul Care to Save Your Life. You actually should probably go back and buy Space, the devotional, 2008. What
Yeah.
else? And where can people follow you on socials?
Manda Carpenter. Yeah, I pretty much just use Instagram. I tried TikTok and I just said I don't need one more app taking up
You're good.
space in my life. And I realized that TikTok's just like for fun mainly. And while I do value fun, it's not it just didn't really fit why I
Yeah,
exist on this earth. So I just stopped using it.
I
So
like it.
I'm only on Instagram right now.
Catch her on the gram. Manda, thank you so much. It was awesome talking to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It means a lot.